Welcome to our community. Susie Thomas with you this morning. We are happy to be welcoming Wendy Avery. And Wendy, you are a mom and a friend of some folks here, and you've got a really great personal story about St. Jude's Hospital and all that it has meant to your family and to so many families in our community. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Good, thank you, and thank you for joining us. First of all, I think one of the items that gets forgotten or slips through the cracks when people are talking about healthcare is the fact that we have so many wonderful facilities that treat patients, and they are nonprofits, and they are provided for and funded by private donations, and then they treat families, if I understand, so that while families can just focus on getting their children well or just getting their children treated and comfortable, they don't have to also be concerned about the financial end of it. Do I have that right?
That's absolutely right. Yes, and that's what I knew about St. Jude Children's Research Hospital years ago, because I saw probably the same commercials that you see on TV or heard on the radio. And I heard all of those things, and I thought that was great. But that's all I really knew, was that it was a hospital. I wasn't even sure where it was at. It's in Memphis, Tennessee. And so way back in 1999, I was hired as a preschool administrator, and this is at a preschool at my church. And the previous administrator was leaving to take another job, and I was hired to do that job. So the previous administrator had been putting on a triathlon fundraiser for St. Jude every year with the preschoolers there at our local preschool here in Austintown. When I took the job, I kind of looked at everything that was happening and what I wanted to keep and what I wanted to change, and that was one thing I thought we would keep. Like I said, I didn't know a lot about St. Jude, but I thought it was a good fundraiser, and it was a good thing for our healthy preschool kids to raise money for kids who are sick. It was a good opportunity to teach them how to give back in a fun kind of way, too. And so I continued that fundraiser. So I did that for almost 7 years in a row. It had been done 8 years previous to my coming there. On the last day of school in June of 2005, I got in the mail at work an invitation to come to St. Jude for 2 days for an event they were calling Volunteer Appreciation Day. They were actually bringing in fundraisers from all over the country to St. Jude to have some meetings and talk about what was going well in their fundraising, what was not so well, and talking about ways to improve those experiences. So I took that home to my husband, and I said, what do you think about this? We had never, at the preschool, never had received an invitation like that in all of the 14 or 15 years we had been doing the Triathlon fundraiser, but June of 2005, we were invited. So my husband said, let's go and make it part of our family vacation. We'll take the kids, and we'll go down to Memphis and drive up back through Nashville and see all the sights.
Yeah, fun vacation.
Yeah, right. Yeah, who goes to Children's Cancer Hospital on vacation? But we did that, and it was quite an experience, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
Like I said, I didn't know a lot about the hospital, really only in name, because it's a very famous hospital. A lot of celebrities help to promote and endorse what happens at the hospital. And so we went there, and our children at the time were 14, 16, and 18. So our oldest son was getting set to start college in the fall, and our daughter was 16, and our youngest son, Nick, was 14 at the time. So we went, we were just amazed at the things that are done at the hospital. And yeah, we heard on our hospital tour, we heard those things that you've already talked about, that St. Jude provides everything for the families so they can concentrate on their sick child. There are no bills given to the family above what insurance pays. And so families never see a bill. Their housing is provided for. Their transportation is provided for. Their food is provided for. Everything. every test, every chemotherapy drug, everything that the family and the child needs is provided for. So we're hearing those things. We're hearing patient and family stories from current patients and families that this is true, that they've just had this amazing experience through the hardest time of their life. And so we were really amazed at this place. Just you could feel hope when you walked through the front doors of the place. And so as we were leaving on the second day to head home, my youngest son, Nick, in the back seat of our minivan, he said, "Mom, I don't ever want to have cancer, but if I do, this is where I want to go." And 6 months later, in December of 2005, right before Christmas, he was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia back here at home.
That just seems almost unbelievable. That must have been reeling, because there you had volunteered, you had done fundraising for it, but the last thing on your mind is that you're going to be on the receiving end of it.
Oh, I never imagined that. And even when Nick said those words, I said, "Oh, goodness, Nick, don't say that. I can't even think of that."
Right.
And yet I could see, I mean, certainly looking back all these years later, can look back and see how God orchestrated this and took us to that place for that time. And because of, obviously, he knew what we were going to be going through. We didn't, but he did. And so when Nick was diagnosed here at home, that's the first thing we said. Do you remember what you said 6 months ago? And he said yes. And all of us, we included all three of our kids in this decision. This is what this means. If we go to Memphis for treatment, we're going to be leaving everybody, everybody back here, our family. It was Nick and I that went. My husband and the other two kids had to stay back home to work and go to school.
Sure.
And we're leaving friends behind and the rest of our family. But all of us knew without a doubt that we were there 6 months before for this specific time.
Let me stop you right there just for 1 second and ask, how did Nick respond to receiving that diagnosis? He's a 16-year-old kid with his whole life ahead of him. How did he, or I'm sorry, was he 14?
He was 14,
14.
Right? Yeah.
Yes. How does a 14-year-old respond to hearing that kind of news?
Oh, well, my son's taught me a lot even from the very beginning of his diagnosis. He was 14, just 3 weeks away from his 15th birthday when we found out. And my husband and I chose to tell him the news privately, just the three of us. We asked the doctors to give us the day so that we could just tell him in our way and be together. So when I told him that it was, in fact, cancer, his first question was, what am I going to do about school? Because kids are concerned about that. Their friends, that's their identity is in their friendships and all
very
of that
practical.
during that time.
That's a very practical question.
Right. So we talked about that a little bit. And then he said, well, God doesn't let things like this happen without a really good reason. And he started to name specific people that he thought maybe their life would change or be different because of what he was going to have to go through. Wow.
What were his symptoms that led you to seek a doctor's advice on it in the first place?
He was diagnosed with migraines at the age of 4. So he always had migraines throughout his life. I would say I think the migraines were a little more frequent, but he also was 14, and he was very involved at school and at church. He was in a school play and a church play at the same time, so lots of practices. So the headaches and the exhaustion was easily explained away. There was no bruising or anything like that. He would have a random fever from time to time, but it would be there for a day, and then it would be gone for a while.
Yeah.
So nothing really alarmed us for quite a while. But as it continued, he seemed to get almost very overly exhausted to the point where he had a hard time getting up the stairs at school because he would say, Mom, I'm just so can't lift my legs to get to the top of the steps. And I started feeling in my mother's gut like something more was wrong.
Yes.
And it took me a while to get any kind of caregiver surrounding us to believe me, and get someone to take a look at him and take me seriously. We went through a lot, emergency room visits and trying to get appointments at a pediatrician, and no one was really listening to me, and they were kind of just, kind of making one place told us he had a sinus infection and sent us home with antibiotics. And
as
another,
a mother, you're hoping that that's it. And
right,
like, okay,
right,
cool, great.
right. And I wanted to, but there's this, if you, mother's gut, if you've ever had that mother's,
yes.
you just know.
Yes.
There's something different about that. I just knew there was something different. And it took a while to get someone to believe me and just see him. And when he did, which was my doctor at the time, Nick was not his patient yet. He took me serious. He said, bring him in, let me look at him. He took some blood work, and within an hour called me and said, I don't know what's wrong, but his hemoglobin is only 4, and his blood's not clotting properly. I have a bed waiting at the hospital for him. You need to get him there right now. And we did, and that started our journey.
Yeah. So the relief of finally getting a diagnosis, but the horror of getting a diagnosis. And once someone in the family has been diagnosed, that changes a family dynamic. Can you talk about how your family dealt with this in those days, in the coming days, and then making that decision to go to St. Jude's?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the day that the 6 days actually leading up his diagnosis, he went through a multitude of tests at the hospital. He was inpatient. They still weren't thinking cancer for quite a while. They were testing him for every weird virus that you could ever think of. But as the tests were all coming back negative, then they started thinking it may be more serious. So for over those 6 days, our family was we were together all the time.
Yes.
My kids would go to school, the older kids, and then they would come right to the hospital after, and we would just always be together. But that's how we're a very close family, and that was just what we would do. And as we talked, after my husband and I told Nick he had cancer, we had friends bring the other 2 kids to the hospital, and we sat, all 5 of us, in a room and just talked about what our experience had been down at St. Jude 6 months before, and about the providence of God, and how we knew without a doubt this was where we were supposed to go, and we were all in agreement, and just went from there. I mean, when Nick and I were gone, the kids would come down when they could, when they get on breaks in school. My husband would come down, but for the most part down there, it was Nick and I in the trenches 24 hours a day.
I'm sure you had some very heart-to-heart talks with God throughout this time. Can you let us in on that aspect of it, as far as your relationship, how that was maybe transformed, maybe going lower and then higher, maybe in a good way, maybe not, but I'm sure there had to be some shouting matches with a loving Heavenly Father. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely. Not so much at the beginning, but later on. At the beginning, I felt even in the great anxiety of getting that diagnosis for your child, I felt a peace about it. I think because we had been at St. Jude 6 months before. So to me, it was like, okay, God has taken us there. He took us there because this is the place Nick's going to be healed, and it's going to be okay, and God's got this. And we're just going to go. We're going to get done. We'll be back home. And just this confidence of feeling that way. Yeah. Now, the night before, we knew for sure that Nick had leukemia. My husband sent me home to sleep. I had been sleeping at the hospital every night, and he said, I'll stay tonight. You go home. So I went home, and it's the first time I had been alone during this whole ordeal. So I went up to my bedroom, and I shut the bedroom door, turned on the light, and my husband had been doing laundry while I was at the hospital. And so everyone's clothes were put away except for Nick's T-shirts. There was a stack of his folded T-shirts on my bed, and I just lost it.
Oh, yeah.
I sat on my bed and just started bawling, holding on to the T-shirts, and I started to just beg God to let it be something else, anything but cancer, any kind of virus. We could deal with anything else, not cancer.
Yeah.
And in that moment of my hysterical crying, I heard a voice. I tell you, I'm not somebody that will tell you I hear God's literal voice. One time in my life I did, though, and it was in that moment. I heard a man's voice very loudly in my room, wait and see what I will do. And that's all I heard. And it was so real, just like you're hearing my voice now, that I stopped and looked to see if somebody's in the room. And obviously there was no one there with me, and my door was shut. I was alone.
Wow.
I wrote that down so I would never forget the exact words. And I began to, and I think this is just humanity, just us as humans. I started to question him. What does that mean? How long am I supposed to wait? What am I waiting for? What are you going to do? But there was nothing then, no answers after that.
Yeah.
That's all I heard. Wait and see what I will do.
You can hang on that. We are going to take a short break here speaking with Wendy Avery and the help and treatment that they received at St. Jude's Hospital. You're listening to Our Community.